China was originally a fattened lamb raised by the United States. Slaughtering China would not only fill the $35 trillion deficit in the U.S., but also allow American hegemony to remain stable for another 100 years. Unfortunately, the U.S. has been raising interest rates for 2 years now, yet it hasn't brought down China's real estate sector, nor has it managed to extract hundreds of trillions worth of assets from China. So, what went wrong? We have to start from the beginning. China's rise began with its accession to the World Trade Organization. But the early WTO negotiations were extremely difficult, and the Chinese people suffered a lot of humiliation. For example, during the 1997 Sino-US trade talks, Americans said that meat produced in China wasn't worthy of being imported for Americans to eat. It could only be fed to dogs. Yet by 2001, negotiations suddenly succeeded. The driving force behind it was none other than our old acquaintance, Bill Clinton. Many American politicians believed that once China was fattened, it would be hard to deal with. China's size was too large and could become a threat to the U.S., but the young, confident, and arrogant Clinton didn't think so. He believed the U.S. had fattened Latin America and Japan before, and in the end, both were easily harvested. So, why couldn't China be next? Size wasn't the problem. The bigger the better, the more to reap. China would become a giant ATM. No need to worry. The money China made would all go back to the U.S. anyway. And things did unfold as Clinton had expected. After joining the WTO, Chinese people began their tough life of working for the U.S. As the world's cheap factory, every yuan we earned meant the U.S. earned 20. If we wanted to buy high-tech products, we'd have to trade billions just to get one Boeing aircraft. The dollars we earned were handed back to the U.S., and whatever little was left was used to buy U.S. Treasury bonds. The U.S. could also launch another round of harvesting via dollar liquidity cycles. It was a total scam, and they profited massively. Yet the Chinese nation is one of resilience and perseverance. When the U.S. recklessly treated China like an emotionless cash machine, the Chinese quietly worked hard, stored up strength, like a dragon lurking deep, waiting for the moment to rise. When Trump took office and saw China truly on the verge of taking off, the U.S. panicked. It threw out everything: trade wars, tech wars, financial wars, whatever worked, they used. The goals were twofold. First, to comprehensively suppress China's rise. Second, to extract China's wealth as early as possible. The U.S. crafted a thorough and aggressive strategy to trap China. As early as 2015, it dug a huge pit for Chinese real estate firms, taking advantage of low U.S. interest rates. American institutions lent massive sums to Chinese developers, who, eager to grab land, borrowed hundreds of billions in U.S. debt. But borrowing is easy, repaying is hard. At the time, the USD-RMB exchange rate was 1 to 6.5, meaning $10 billion could convert to 65 billion RMB. But now, the rate is 1 to 7.5, 7.3. The RMB has depreciated about 12% against the dollar. One now needs 73 billion RMB to repay $10 billion, a loss of 8 billion RMB. On top of that, rising dollar interest rates led Chinese capital to flow out to the U.S., draining liquidity and becoming the final straw that crushed domestic developers. The financial war came with a trade war. The so-called trade war meant the U.S. imposed tariffs on Chinese imports, weakening their competitiveness. You have to understand, after joining the WTO, China broke into global markets through low-end manufacturing like clothes, shoes, and toys. By raising tariffs, the U.S. attacked the foundation of China's export economy. Many small and medium-sized enterprises saw sharp drops in sales, forcing wage cuts and layoffs. Employees without income couldn't repay mortgages. Now things looked grim. Manufacturing was under pressure, real estate faced default and unfinished projects. With that, how could the financial system avoid bad debts? The U.S. sat back, waiting for China to erupt in an unprecedented economic crisis, ready to swoop in and buy cheap assets. But nothing happened. Apart from a few real estate blow-ups, China's economy remained stable. The Americans never expected the state-owned banks, the backbone of China, to be so solid. Even with bad debts, so what? As long as it's not made public, it won't hurt. We can extend deadlines, trade time for space, and break through the trap of the financial war. No financial crisis means the U.S. can't profit, and instead might fall into crisis itself. If China doesn't collapse, then the first to collapse will be the U.S. Why? It's simple. To harvest China, the U.S. placed a massive bet. Since March 2022, interest rates have been rising for nearly 2.5 years. With the current rates, Interest alone on the 35 trillion US debt costs $2 trillion a year, but annual US revenue is only $4 trillion. What now? Tell Americans to tighten their belts? Impossible. Lower rates? That won't work either. If the US cuts rates, capital will rush into China's high-quality assets. With that inflow, China's economy would take off again. GDP might surpass the US within 3 years. So now the US is riding a tiger. It can't raise rates, can't cut them, just hanging in limbo. Meanwhile, European countries have begun cutting rates. They no longer follow the US like before. Back then, Europe hoped to benefit from America's lead. Maybe grab a few scraps.